Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmerie. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the relevant radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Singer Rihanna has officially announced she is expecting a baby, and women everywhere are oohing and awing over the photo shoot that has been released. I'll share with you a little later why we actually should be talking about not just Rihanna, but any pregnancy that comes across our celebrity news feed. Why are young girls anxious and depressed? I'll be joined by Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com in just a moment, and we'll discuss helping girls develop friendships, overcome rejection, and also overcome depression and anxiety. Ultimately, it's about taking back your kid from the digital world they're living in. Also, tips for how to live out tomorrow's feast day, that is the presentation of our Lord in the temple. It is a great day to go to Mass, and if you think of it, pray for my husband and I, because it's actually our wedding anniversary as well. And coming up, I'm also going to answer a question about how to help dress more modestly. Just finding clothes can be so difficult. I get it. From teenage years into college to young adult, it's hard. And so I'm going to give some guidelines for helping to find resources of what on earth we can wear that is appropriate given the occasion that we find ourselves in, and also just more mature. There comes a certain time in our wardrobe where it needs to be changed up based on our age and circumstances. But I want to come to a really fascinating message I received from a pediatrician on social media. She was sharing with me her shock as she's a new pediatrician on rounds, and as she meets with parents and their children, she's seen an increase in anxiety and depression. In fact, those numbers are off the charts. And she's even mentioned things such as seeing trends such as transgenderism, ADHD, where a parent thinks their child has ADHD but doesn't, and all of it comes back to electronic use. One parent whose 12-year-old child is now identifying as transgender, they recognize that their child was on Pinterest too much and that they needed to limit Pinterest. Well, if you didn't know, Pinterest has a tremendous amount of information about so-called gender-affirming mindsets, with everything from how to change your clothes from girls to boys' clothes, vice versa, how to go through sex changes, how to go through with any number of things confusing your identity. One story that this pediatrician told me was of a young child, 9 years old, whose parents brought the child in to address the issue of ADHD. But the diagnosis came back as negative. There's no ADHD present. And when the pediatrician started to speak to them about the amount of time spent on social media and technology, she recommended the latest guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatricians to reduce phone use, to reduce technology use, even recommending things such as a dumb phone if your kid needs to have a phone. Well, here's the reality. The kid was sitting there watching as the doctor was talking to the parents. The kid was shaking its head, the little kid shaking his head here, shaking his head, and then right in front of the parents and the pediatrician changes the passwords on his social accounts as well as on his actual devices, locking the parents out because he was not going to be limited when it came to his screen time. And so the pediatrician continued to talk to the parents about the impact of dopamine hits from notifications, lights on screens, you name it. Here's the reality. Screens are a problem today, and it's a leading cause and problem, especially for anxiety and depression. CNN reported in August that 1 in 4 adolescents globally are experiencing clinical levels of depression and anxiety. In fact, it's 1 in 5 youth are experiencing clinical anxiety symptoms. 1 in 4 youth are experiencing clinical depression symptoms. That could be your kid. It very well may be. Mental Health America stats for 2021 have shown that 1 in 10 children suffer from severe, major depression. Now, this is worse in particular among girls. Girls are lonely, anxious, and depressed, and even self-harming. We know that their rate of depression is, in fact, 3 times higher than little boys. So the question behind all of this is why? What's happening to our girls, and how can we help them with their friendships, with rejection, with loneliness, depression, and anxiety? Joining me today to help answer these questions is Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com. She's going to join me because we need to talk about these trends. The challenge is significant for young girls today. The challenge especially requiring that young girls believe, because this is what most young girls believe today. And I'm talking about girls as young as 8 years old who are being sexualized by the culture to believe that they must perpetually be hot and available. Whether you are a 60-year-old woman or an 8-year-old child, this pressure is prevalent for all of us. And it's starting younger and younger. And so at the heart of this is the issue of screens, which is why we're going to talk about this in just a few moments here with Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com, because there are solutions, there is help, but it requires you as a parent making a change. As I've been looking at some of the statistics and everything surrounding teen anxiety and depression, I even think about how I myself struggled with anxiety and depression right in between those middle school and high school years. I had a horrible experience with my peer friends group, girls just making fun of me, being mean. Number of things happened, and I did spiral into a little bit of a depression and was also dealing with what began the journey of some major health issues for me. And as I look back on it over the last couple of days, I've been thinking about how social media actually did play a part in this. And I hadn't really thought about that a lot before. A lot of what I was discovering and what had happened to me in those important kind of 12 to 14-year-old ranges, what happened, part of it was taking place online. It was taking place digitally. Things that people were saying about me behind my back, as well as things that people were saying directly to me, but via the platform of social media. Now, those were the days when no one was supposed to have social media unless they were over the age of 18. And of course I did. I think that all of this happened when I had a MySpace. I'm really dating myself here. Really dating myself. But here's the reality. I saw even earlier on when social media use was far less than it was today. I didn't have a phone in hand such as a smart iPhone. I had a flip phone at the time. I think I might have even had a chocolate, which for as technologically advanced as that was, it's nothing in comparison to the capacity that we have today to use our technology to perpetually be connected with the world via social media, whatever means is necessary. And so just looking again at the difference that almost 20 years later is showing how it must be so difficult for young women today, far more difficult than it was for me. Already, I remember being a young girl transitioning into my own body, into my friends groups, figuring out how I wanted to dress, how I was going to eat, all of these things that already provide enough pressure on our psyche, on our individuality, on our ability to experience love and show love. It's only becoming harder. Most women I know can look back on their middle school and teenage years and think about many challenges that they themselves experienced. But we don't often think about the difference between today and, let's say, 20 years ago, and how much more difficult it is. And at the heart of the challenge is screens, which is why I really do hope that you will consider what we're going to discuss later today during the show surrounding the issue of screens, how to make changes, understanding especially the issue surrounding limiting screen time and delaying screen time. So we'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie to discuss this. I'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, the number is 1-888-914-9149. You can also ask a question now on social media at Timmerie. That's Timmerie.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
It's great to be with you today, and we're going to address the topic of friendship for young girls. What's behind the trend of increased depression, anxiety, and self-harm? And might I add, although we won't get into it today, this trend of young girls coming out as transgender all comes back to the anxiety and depression young girls are facing, especially surrounding rejection. So joining me to discuss this is Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com. She has an incredible program there available for parents to help take back your kid from the digital world. And so joining me now to discuss this and what's behind the trend is Melanie Hempe. Welcome to Trending.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to talk to you this evening about this.
Let's dive into the facts. Mental Health America stats for 2021 has acknowledged that at least 1 in 10 young people today are suffering from severe major depression. That doesn't include what we see stats from CNN reporting in August of last year that 1 in 4 adolescents are experiencing elevated depression symptoms and 1 in 5 youth are experiencing elevated anxiety symptoms. What is behind this trend?
I think what's behind it, and just from my nursing background and all the research I've done on this with all the families, of course, that we work with, as well as all the doctors I work with, one of the biggest things is their use of social media, okay? These numbers are not just going up for no reason. And when we sum it up, we see that this pain from the rejection that is found on social media is just like physical pain. It activates the same area in your brain when you feel rejected. We know it's different for girls, and this is what's kind of fascinating about it. Boys can be rejected too, but they have a higher sensitivity to getting rewards. Like, they want rewards. That's why video games are so, hard for them to resist, because they're getting rewards from that. They're not quite as, they're not quite as affected by the rejection, but girls have a higher sensitivity to losses, and especially in the adolescent years, their brains, boys or girl brains, are not fully connected. They don't have all their emotional tools on board yet. So this is very, very, very dangerous for them for girls, we'll talk about girls tonight, especially stay in the social media world where they are getting rejected almost every minute, okay? One way or another. They're posting pictures that someone isn't liking, or they don't get enough likes, they don't get enough likes, or, they're getting rejected, right? I think that you can understand how much rejection there is. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it leads to anger and anxiety and depression and jealousy and sadness and even aggression. And that's why some girls get really aggressive when they get on social media. I think it also reduces their impulse control. And we know that it affects their immune system. They don't feel good. They're not getting enough sleep. And ultimately what's happening is they are not getting enough eye-to-eye contact with real people. So where a boy may get on social media.
Yeah, just to kind of comment on that briefly, because I think it's interesting you mentioned the immune system as well here, because I have known firsthand for years, if I spend much time on social media, I feel terrible. I'm irritable, I'm grumpy, just causing you to stay up later. You have a sore throat from not sleeping
Yes.
enough. Your body's not moving enough. Your lymph nodes can start to swell up from lack of movement. I mean, I could go
That's
on and
right.
on. And
Yes.
a lot of people don't realize that, they think because their kids just at home using their phone, they know where they're at, that they're safe. But we're actually impacting the body, the soul, the heart, the mind all at once.
It's the whole thing. And they are chronically rejected. Okay, chronic rejection is what we see on social media. Sure, there's some good things you might say. Well, isn't it good that they're staying in touch? But let me tell you what happens. So after a girl gets her feelings hurt on social media, which, like I said, it happens almost every hour. I mean, she can't be on long before she's getting jealous. She's feeling like her picture wasn't good enough, or she saw a party that she did not get included in. So she starts to get this rejection. And what happens is she enters this appraisal stage where she's starting to evaluate, okay, what am I going to do next? I've got to do something, right? Because she's got to get this belonging need met. As humans, we all have this need. It's a survival mechanism. We have to belong to a group. And so in her attempt to reconnect, she starts changing her behavior to fit in with a different group, right? She's trying to find a group. And so what happens is she can do one of two things. She can get friendlier and start paying more attention to social cues. She's trying to be more likable. You and I both know these girls that are trying so hard in our friend groups, to be the popular one. And then this is where they lose their identity. They don't even know who they are anymore. They're trying so hard to be like the group. Or she could turn into a bully. So she either gets kind of friendlier, not nicer, but friendlier, or she turns into a bully. And the bully girl, she's mean and she's responding with aggression and she's lashing out. And this is all because she's been rejected. And we all know that bullies are 99% of the time, they have a history of not being included and being rejected.
Right.
And
right.
so
It's interesting you mentioned some of this because it reminds me of my own story. I mentioned earlier in the program that I struggled with anxiety and depression right on the cusp between middle school and high school. And also struggled with some health issues, was on social media more. This was like right when, you had a MySpace when you shouldn't. I was right in that age range. Technology was not as advanced as they were. I did not have a smartphone in my hand.
Right.
I had a flip phone still. But here's the deal. I think that, when I hear what you're saying, I remember when I was going through this and starting to come out of it, I remember my mom commenting, you changed the way you dressed. You were acting differently than you had acted because I was trying to fit in with a certain group of people that ultimately ended up rejecting me. And I think about this in terms of social media, all the more so. We're not just trying to fit in with a group of people we're seeing face to face, but we're actually trying to fit in with an artificial version of ourselves because so many of these images are edited from lighting to angles, you name it. So we're trying to fit in with artificial fake versions of other people, essentially.
Exactly. And when you're 15, you are at the peak age for the most pain from rejection. Now, this is science. This is not my opinion. We know that at 15, now it still is bad. I mean, you talk to a lot of grown women and they still feel rejection pain. We all feel it, but it peaks at the age of 15. And this is when most kids are on social media. And that's why at Screen Strong, we help you get your daughter off of the social media, fill her life in with things that are going to be very helpful and not stressful and not full of rejection. But in order to do that, you've got to look at how friends fit in to an adolescent's life. And this is something that is so fascinating to me. Do you know that there is a number of the correct or the social, your brain is a social organ, so it can only handle so many friends. Do you know what that number is of that close inner friendship group?
I know that it's less than 10, but I've seen studies showing far less than that. And when I say 10, it's, that you can have a group of people that you know and interact with, but having close relationships, what I've seen is really it comes down to one person as we age, which is why we usually end up having just one spouse. We believe in monogamy.
Yes. No, that is true. That is true. The intimate, innermost group is between 3 and 5. And what that means, yes, you have your spouse for sure, and that's a different level. But then with your friends, so these young girls are out there trying to get 50 friends or 100 friends or, 500 friends, and their brain can't handle it. It's impossible. Their brain is a social organ. It's like a muscle. It can't handle that many. And so what we know from the science is that 3 to 5 really good friends that you connect with, maybe weekly. These are just general ideas. Okay, that's kind of your weekly group. Okay, then you've got the 15. That's the next number of friends. And that might be your Bible study, or it might be a team sport or a jury. Somebody that you connect with once a month is typically when that group. And then you have the larger group, which is 50. And that could just be like a PTA meeting at the school or church or something. And then 150 is max. And that is people that you connect with maybe once a year. And that kind of looks like our Christmas card list. So what we have is a lot of teenage girls that are trying to keep up with 50 or 150 friends. And it's like breaking their brain. It's breaking their social organ. They can't hold it. It's too heavy. But social media tells us that you're nothing unless you have 1,000 likes on your, Instagram. But their ability and skill to manipulate information about these constantly changing social domains is so weak because they're young. They haven't their brain isn't even fully connected till they're 25 years old. It's still developing. So how many friends should a teen girl have? It's about three or 5 maybe. And I didn't know this. I just did this research recently. It takes 200 hours of in-person time to move someone from being a stranger to being a good friend. That is fascinating. That is fascinating to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think about even where people are trying to have 10 friends. I don't have time for 10 deep relationships. And for you to say it takes 200 hours to really build that deep connection, I don't have time for more than 3, or I don't even have time for 1. And, you look at the level and amount of homework that young girls have today. You look at after school activities, you look at family time, add everything together, getting enough sleep, eating properly. We are perpetually, and we know this, running on adrenaline. We're running on cortisol and those high stressor hormones. We're not getting our basic needs met. And people are not the wiser for having had developed good friendships.
No, they think they're having these good friendships online, and they're not. And so when they let them down, they're devastated, and they're even more rejected because they thought they were a friend. But teenagers everywhere need to understand that these are not your friends. They are your acquaintances, and they're not filling that need for friendship. The brain can only handle just a few. And this is why, ironically, when you get married, now, the research says you lose about 2 spots, right? So you kind of lose. If you had 5 girlfriends, now maybe you're down to 3 because that marriage partner kind of takes the place of 2 of them. And I get it. And then they say when you have a baby, well, then, it heads south again because, once you have a baby, then, you're not as social and you're not managing and maintaining those friendships as well. But I think it's fascinating that if everybody thinks about their very best friend growing up, 200 hours. You probably did back then spend 200, but today I really don't know any teenagers besides my own that spend that much time with people. They don't have smartphones. They don't have social media. So all their time, on the weekends, and we spend a lot of time together. We have friends over all the time. Their friends are over even during the week. They see a lot of their friends at their ball practices and whatnot. So they're really adding up their hours. And I am so happy that we have made that choice. And so many families are happy that they've done that. We're getting our kids back by doing that. They do not need social media. It's all fake. It's not helping them. It's making them, worse. It's making them stressed and anxious, and especially our girls. Boys don't have the same emotional investment, although now many of them do, but many of them don't have the same emotional investment in social media.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Joining me is Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com. We'll include a link in the podcast notes. We'll post that on social media as well. ScreenStrong.com. Take back your kid from the digital world they are living in. It's fake. It doesn't make them happy. It doesn't make them healthy. It doesn't make them smarter either. And this is why we're
No.
talking about it here on Trending. Melanie, you, again, coming back to that number about how you need 200 hours to develop good friendships, as well as how when you, as an adult, get married and then have a kid, your friendships continue to drop off. I think about how so often as adults, we think so fondly back on our high school years or our elementary years. We think about those rich relationships, and maybe we've maintained them, or maybe we just have those fond memories, and we tend to glorify those days. And I think that this is part of the reason sometimes why parents idealize kids having social media to fit in and stay connected, thinking that those are the types of relationships that they're developing. But those are not the relationships that young people are developing today, because they do not have that quality time that you mentioned that we have idealized about what we had years ago.
Yeah, and they try to transpose it over to think it's the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. And if you really stop and think about it for a minute, it's really easy to figure it out. If you or I, who didn't grow up with smartphones and who didn't grow up with all this, if we had to really think back about what our middle school years would have been like with all this stuff, we just would shudder to think. It is so wrong. Everything about it is so harmful for them. We get our feelings hurt even as adults. We get, if somebody says something, or it doesn't take much to get our feelings hurt. Let's just say that on social media. So you can only imagine a teenager trying to deal with it, and the way to solve it, because I really like to talk about solutions a lot. So you're listening, You're like, oh my gosh, my teenage girl, you're right. She's depressed. I don't know what's happening. I've got a couple ideas just really quickly. First of all, you got to get them off social media, and it's not as hard as you think, and we can help you do that. We do that all the time. In our Facebook group, Screen Strong Families, we do have a lot of families in there that help each other. But you have to take a look at it from a teen perspective, and you have to be the coach. So you're the coach. You're not the teenager. You're the coach, and you're looking at it from their perspective. It's going to be tough, but you can do it. You have to plan more in-person time every week at your house. And I mean, make pizzas, get food in your house, because it's all about food. They love food. You want to make your house a fun house. You want to get teenagers coming over to your house, put those phones away, get the games out, put a puzzle out. We have a puzzle all the time, and kids are always over here at our house doing stuff. So that in-person time is super important. Get them a journal to write their thoughts instead of publicly sharing every private thought on the internet. That's enough to make me depressed just thinking about it.
Right. A lost gift that we no longer have, where people used to always have a journal growing up.
Yes. You have to get your teenager a journal, your boys too. Don't get them a pink one, just get them a brown one. But get them a journal.
Right. And this comes back even to, Jordan Peterson. He talks all about the importance of documenting your life. And here's a whole generation of millennials who are saying, hey, I want to do this. It's helping me. I feel better. Well, if Jordan Peterson is helping tons of millennials take back their lives through one of those handful of tips, which is journaling, maybe it's a wake-up call for us to realize this has been a lost art that's helped us in psychologically processing day to day.
Yes, you have to do that. Get your kids a journal. And you don't read it. You don't have to read it. But there's social media. By golly, you need to read it. If you're not reading it, then you're in big trouble. Schedule downtime without screens. Downtime means sitting and maybe knitting or doing handwork or reading or doing some exercise or going for a walk or walking the dog, real downtime. That doesn't mean that you've got pods in your ears and you're listening to stuff online making you more stressed. It's not even the crazy music. I mean, if you want to listen to some calm music maybe, but schedule it. Put it in their day. Say, okay, you're going to get 1 hour of downtime. You've got to get exercise. They have to get exercise. And then the biggest thing that you can do to solve the problem is spend more time with your teenager. Focus on that parent attachment during these teen years. We spend so much time with our kids when they're little, and we think when they get older that they're on their own. And they take a U-turn, let me tell you, like around 13 or 14 or something. It seems like they take a U-turn and they start heading backwards in their developmental, stages. Right. And they need more from you. I mean, it's their brain development is reorganizing, neuronal pruning is happening. They need you now more than they have ever needed you in their whole life, ever. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, this is what parents are missing. And we know from research and survey studies that we know that if a child is spending 5 hours on his screen every day, then the parent is spending 10. The parent is usually spending double the time that the child spends.
Wow.
And so when that happens, there is no parent-led direction in the relationship. And this is a huge problem for teenagers. They are lonely, and yet they might roll their eyes and act like they don't want to hang out with you. They want to hang out with you. They want you to pick them. They want you to put your screen down and just sit with them. Just sit in silence and read together. Just do a crossword puzzle together. Do a crossword puzzle every night right before dinner or right after dinner, or make it a ritual. Men, dads out there, stop playing video games with your kids and do something more meaningful with them. They want us. Your kids are proud of you. They think that, you're their heroes. So we have to start acting like that. And I don't want to just sound like the broken record, and I don't want anybody to feel guilty, but this is what our teenagers need. So a 15-year-old girl is feeling so much pain from rejection. It's like a physical pain. She needs you to hug her and touch her. Lots of touch. There's no more touch in our culture. We don't touch. We just hold on to our screens, and gotta schedule this downtime. It's not about just limiting screens. It's about scheduling the downtime to spend time with your kids. About every screen problem out there can be solved with you, the parent, spending more time with your kids. And when I started doing this, I had to leave my phone in the car when I brought my kids home from school. I had to leave it in the car because I just could not answer it.
Well, it's distracting. I had my phone ringer on today for the first time in a while. I usually keep it off unless I'm expecting a call. And I kept hearing it beep for every text message and phone call that was wrong. And I was reaching for it every time. I'm going, no, stay present. My 1-year-old's right here. And of course, one of the times I pick it up, here she is giving me the sweetest smooches on my forehead as I'm trying to answer something.
I know, and then get rid of those smartphones and get them like a gap. We have a certain phone that we recommend and stuff on our site just because we've researched the world over, and so it's what my kids have, and it's just talk and text, and it is
what
fabulous.
What is it called?
It's a Gab phone, and we have a discount code on our site, Strong, that you can use if you order it. So you get a discount, but it is fabulous. This phone, oh my gosh, I looked for like 3 years, and I finally found one that I kept looking for flip phones, and I couldn't find. They don't make them. So this is just talk and text. In fact, we have one for our house phone, and so for the longest time, they didn't even have their own phone, right? We just had if they had to go to baseball, they would just take it and then bring it back. Kids don't need to be responsible for keeping up with even text, because text can get real mean too. Now this phone does talk and it does text, and that's it. It doesn't have internet, doesn't have social media. There's no way to go around the parental controls because it just doesn't have a server. It doesn't have access. So it just is fabulous. So,
and you're talking about a shared phone again, the importance of returning to a shared phone. Doesn't anyone remember the fact that someone else could pick up the phone and listen in on your conversation? It used to keep you accountable.
That's why you had a journal. You could write your private thoughts there.
I want to summarize some of the recommendations you have, and I know we have calls coming. If you have a call from Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com, the number's 1-888-914-9149. You can also ask your question now on my Instagram story at Timmerie. That's Timmerie to ask your question. But to summarize that list of things that you can do, and please let me know if I missed anything. Get them completely off social media. Make your house a fun house. Make lots of food so that people want to hang out at your house. They can have the social engagement there. Get them a journal. We need this. We've lost this art. Modern psychology is showing the importance of returning to it. In fact, millennials are taking back their lives again because they're actually journaling and processing their feelings and hopes and dreams. Spend more time with your kids. Even if it's sitting in silence or whatever fun thing it might be, not video games, hug and touch your kids again. They're desperate for this. Schedule the time in. Get a Gab phone. Your kid doesn't need their own phone. They can share this phone. It's talk and text only. We're including links in the show notes. What are we missing besides, of course, your website, screenstrong.com, to walk you through the whole process? And we'll include a link in the podcast notes to that link, as well as the Facebook group for parents supporting one another.
We have a brand new parent course that we are offering actually to schools as a bundle. So if you are in a school, if you're a counselor, if you're a teacher listening, if you're a parent listening, or PTA, we're trying to really get this word out. So our parent course is not like anything you've ever seen. It's like a little mini science, lesson of 9 lessons, and then we have the solutions course that goes with it. And we also do a 7-day challenge in the schools. You can do a 7-day challenge in your house, in your home school. You can do a 30-day challenge and get on our Facebook group and talk about that. And then the podcast, the Screen Strong Families podcast, we have experts on there talking about how to do this. We're trying to help parents with another pathway, because if you don't have another pathway, then you're probably not going to do it, because we can't change if we don't have a community. We have to have a community, right? And that's what you're building.
We'll include a link to the podcast where you joined me last time explaining that your kid won't be dumb without technology. Your kid won't be antisocial without technology. In fact, quite the opposite. So we'll include a link to that conversation from before. But even just a note, the American Academy of Pediatrics, in their most recent announcement of guidelines for children's media use, they even recommend media-free locations in the home, and they recommend that be the bedroom. No media and technology in the room. I'm an adult. We don't even have our cell phones in our bedroom because it's healthier for relationships, for sleep, you name it. But we have questions coming in, Melanie. Let's see. Christina from Albuquerque, New Mexico is calling to ask a question about her granddaughter and technology use. Christina, what's your question for us today?
Actually, it's my best friend. She has a disabled daughter, and from the time she wakes up in the morning, her daughter asks for that iPad. She communicates, pressing buttons, I want a drink, please. And I just think to myself, shouldn't she also have downtime? And she's got a favorite show at nighttime where she just goes hog wild, just flailing her arms. She's so excited, and, that's good because she's getting some exercise. But I just wonder about, it's a sight to see, and we laugh hysterically. It's so funny and cute. But I just wonder, shouldn't there be more?
Yeah, you have to have purposeful use. And so it's like dessert. You don't eat dessert for every day, for every meal. You enjoy it with friends a couple times a week, once a week. You don't overdo it. And so for kids who have more disabilities, there are certain things that you can do, but I tell you what, the science is getting more and more clear that it stimulates kind of these wrong parts of their brain. It stimulates the limbic area in their brain. It's not stimulating their frontal cortex at all. And there are so many other things they can do, but they do get very dependent on these screens. It's very sad. Keep in mind that the bigger the screen, the better. So if you have a huge TV in the den, that's going to be better than a little phone in your kid's face. And typically that's just because you're co-viewing. Co-viewing is always better. Like I said, when you eat dessert, don't ever get in the closet and eat dessert by yourself. You should be eating it with a friend, right? Kind of co-viewing. So I don't know if any of that helps, but I do know there are situations where screens, of course, are very useful for some disabilities. Of course, the technology is fabulous, but like anything, we can take it to the wrong extreme.
That's Melanie Hempe from screenstrong.com. So many resources there. Please check it out. We'll include a link not only to that website, we'll include a link to the Gab phone, talk and text only, as well as the Facebook parent group to help support one another in getting your kids off social media, off their technology, to take them back from the digital world they're living in. It's causing a lot of health, interpersonal issues today, and we can take them back. I'll be right back here on Trending.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
We've been talking about taking our kids back from the digital world they're living in. Kelly has called from Maine, sharing how our conversation we just had with Melanie Hempe from ScreenStrong.com is spot on. She said she's been off internet and TV for 8 years, and she actually got her brain back. So we're talking about taking kids back, but also ourselves, finding that self-control and a good balance to how we use social media and technology as a tool, not as something that's taking our lives. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie, and I want to talk about Rihanna's pregnancy. The singer Rihanna made a major announcement this week about her first baby to be expected, and I think it's an important conversation that we have because as we've been talking about technology and screens, well, the reality is that young people, as well as ourselves, are being influenced by influencers, Hollywood. It's not just singers such as Rihanna and others such as her boyfriend and baby daddy, ASAP Rocky, which, by the way, a side note, I had no idea who this guy was. I'm like, is that really his name, ASAP Rocky? But that's a stage name. I have to remind myself. He's a rapper and a record producer. But it brings me back to this whole idea. Why would we talk about Rihanna's pregnancy announcement? Well, all of the digital world's talking about it. It's everywhere on social media. It's everywhere from Vogue to CNN to Forbes. Everyone's talking about the fact that Rihanna is expecting a baby. On one side, this is so exciting because it's a celebration of life in the womb. It's a reminder for us to have that conversation that the only difference between Rihanna's baby and a baby who is aborted today is one is wanted and one is unwanted. And that is a justification of abortion in our culture. I also find it fascinating, and this is why we should talk about it, because our young people today are seeing Rihanna pregnant and they have something to say about it. They have thoughts, but we can help shape the conversation of what they think about everything from pregnancy to marriage. And it's interesting because I've seen a trend all over social media since the pregnancy announcement where people are asking, well, are Rihanna and ASAP Rocky married now? Did they secretly get married before making the announcement? Do they have plans to get married before the baby's born? When is the baby due? So many of the searches online have to do with speculation as to whether or not they'll get married or whether or not perhaps they secretly have. Now, nothing's led on in that respect. ASAP Rocky's still being called Rihanna's boyfriend, but we'll also give him the title of baby daddy now. But it provides the opportunity for us to talk about Rihanna's pregnancy as well. And to talk about what's the best circumstance for having a child. That yes, in all cases, we should always celebrate life. And we do understand mistakes do happen, but that child is always a gift. And that women, especially even the women and men in our own communities and families, will be supported in the midst of a crisis pregnancy. But what we also have the opportunity to talk about is that it's fascinating that we as a society still want to see our celebrities, the people and influencers that we follow, have that picture-perfect story. Okay, so here, Rihanna and ASAP Rocky are expecting their first child. Notice everyone's asking if they're married. Whether you are in a pro-marriage mindset or not, we want to see our idols and our influencers in that picture-perfect marriage. That they're having the wedding, they're having the baby after. We see this because it makes sense. A child has a natural born right to a mother and a father. And so these are things that we should and could talk about in light of the revelation of Rihanna being pregnant. That yes, we want to see babies within the context of marriage. Notice that even people who are struggling with the idea of getting married themselves or have wounds from their own families of origins, that even they want to see the fairy tale story ending of the marriage, the parents, and the kid. Especially from the perspective of Catholic Church teaching, one thing that's so important that we need to emphasize in a culture that's become rather confused about this is a child's right to his or her mother and father. Adoption is a great gift in the circumstance where a child cannot be raised by their parents, where the parent has chosen the best option, the best outcome for a child is to place that child for adoption. But what the church continues to hold so strongly to, Whether it be the issue of IVF and surrogacy, which we'll talk about tomorrow, especially trending in the celebrity world, or it be the context of a baby being born outside of the context of marriage, that child has a right not only to know their mother and father, to be created in the loving act of their mother and father, but also to have a relationship with their mother and father within the context of marriage. This is best and healthiest for children, and it's so important that we see how important that context is for human flourishment. And so just a thought there on Rihanna's pregnancy. And apparently I said ASAP Rocky wrong. I've been told twice now. Thank you for the correction. It's ASAP Rocky, not ASAP Rocky. I apologize. I'm so not with it. In fact, there were 2 abbreviations over the last day or so that I was just not getting right. Someone was texting me, a teenager, and they said OC. I'm like, what does OC mean? And I'm sitting here trying to figure it out. They meant, of course. It wasn't a typo. They didn't mean okay or of or anything else. The other one I learned, I'm filling you in on the text lingo, is I think it was TM. So TM means tomorrow. That one's a little more common sense, but I just don't use abbreviations in text. Anyways, I'm dating myself. I've talked about having a MySpace. I don't get these references sometimes. And apparently, again, just to be clear, Rihanna's having a baby with the baby daddy, ASAP Rocky, not ASAP Rocky. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Last week, or 2 weeks ago actually, we talked about former Playboy bunny and actually widow of Hugh Hefner, Crystal Hefner, and how she's come out over the last few weeks talking about how she is now choosing a more modest lifestyle, modest way of dressing. In fact, she's even been photographed in a beautiful one-piece swimsuit, along with some other gorgeous clothing. Again, not saying that she's perfect in terms of her clothes, but it is really fascinating to see this Playboy bunny go from the life that she herself has experienced now to, being the widow of Hugh Hefner and choosing a totally different lifestyle. She's removed everything plastic from her body and is all about talking about natural health and natural beauty. And so with that, a lot of questions I received since that conversation had to do with how to find clothes that are stylish but also appropriate and attractive. I think it's a really important question, and it can be so hard as women to find adequate clothing, especially as a young woman and especially for teenagers, where you're in this transition between less sophisticated clothing and fun clothing to more professional or appropriate given the state in life and the movements that you find yourself making. For example, having a little kid and getting up and down off of the ground, you wouldn't necessarily wear the same types of clothes that you'd wear prior to having a child. I was just talking to my sister about this. But let's talk about some tips for how to figure out clothes, especially one of the questions I received from Susan in email had to do with a college graduate and just being able to find her own style and clothing in this new transition in her life. So number one, whether you're a parent or you yourself are trying to figure out your own clothing, it's so important that we have patience in the process. Modern fashion trends can be kind of difficult at times, and so we have to reshape what our style will look like and also be patient that we will find those clothes we so desperately need. Fun fact, I am short, I'm like 5'2", and finding not only modest clothes but also clothes that fit me right can be difficult. My parents long ago embraced taking us to the tailor to tailor any clothes we needed because that's just what we needed in order to have an adequate wardrobe, because clothes needed to be the right length and everything. So I highly recommend don't be afraid to use a tailor to help make adjustments that are necessary. There are some great tailors out there, and I do, on a side note, really wish I could have custom clothes made. Fun fact, the Saint Gianna Molla actually had most of her wardrobe custom made for her. I think that's pretty cool. Her daughter's living, breathing, alive today. She died not that long ago. So a really cool saint to pray to help you in finding the right clothing and to just find your own style. So that was number 2, Saint Gianna, and kind of thinking about perhaps whether it be having clothes altered or made. Okay, third tip is body type. It's important that we know our body type in certain things. It might even be a certain length of dress or shorts. Might look fine on me because I'm shorter, but maybe for someone who's about 8 inches taller could look extremely immodest. And so this is where we have to know our body type and limits for certain lengths of clothing on ourselves. With that, layering is always helpful. Undershirts can be your best friend to stay modest. Of course, there are different styles and textures you can even use for undershirts, not just going for a typical cotton undershirt, but even something fancier for a nicer piece of clothing. Also, I'm all about, especially, what I'd wear out to lunch on a Sunday afternoon might be different from what I'd wear to mass, and having those layers to cover the shoulders or cover different parts of your body a little bit more so, I think is extremely helpful as well. I love scarves, I love shawls, and they can be really, really stylish. Okay, number 5, don't shop in junior sections. If you are in high school or a young adult, we have to stop always looking in the junior sections. Even if your kid is a teenager, starting to look in the adult area of clothing can be really helpful, actually. They're not going to find that they like everything, but they may find those gems of items that will be so stylish and they will fall in love with, and the quality of clothing is usually a little bit better. I've been asked for various resources for clothing and recommendations. I'll include some links to various clothing stores that I found great, but I love to shop online because sometimes that's easier. But we'll talk more as the weeks go by about some tips for helping to find your clothing style, but those are kind of some just go-tos to answer that question from Susan. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Tomorrow here on Trending, we're going to talk about the trend of infertility, in vitro fertilization, and surrogacy, that's IVF, and how we have to be ready to grapple this issue as Catholics and as pro-lifers in the face of the challenges we face surrounding fertility. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. I'm going to discuss celebrity surrogacy, IVF, infertility, and why we have to talk about this as Catholics in the pro-life movement. It's not just celebrities and the wealthy who are going through it, it's many of us as well. We're also going to discuss the reality TV show Selling Sunset, so join me Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.